Hello and welcome to my video. So the end of 2021 is nearing, and it's that time of year when everyone reviews how their year of reading went. I guess a little bit late, but I still thought it would be fun and interesting to kind of do the same. So instead of uploading two separate videos recapping my best and worst books of the year, I've decided to just review everything I've read in this one video. This is mostly because I've branched out to read a lot of books I normally wouldn't touch, and I kind of want to reflect on how my reading experience has been. So I'm going to go through all the books I've read this year and give like a little brief recap of what I thought about them. To make this easier, I'm going to split this video into two sections, books I loved and books I did not enjoy or care for. And so yeah, I'm gonna start with the books that I didn't like so that we can end on a more positive note. I'm going to start off with the books I hated the most and then progress to books that I enjoyed more and more. And then I'm going to rank any series together as one just to make it a little bit shorter and I wouldn't have to, get the series all jumbled up with individual books. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to start off this section with the Corsairs trilogy by Margaret and Robert Krams. I believe that's how it's said, I don't know. I've already made an entire rant video about these books, so I won't go into too much detail. I will say the first book was the strongest out of the three, the second book dragged, and I couldn't even finish the third. It's the only DNF of the year. I think the problem was that I went into this trilogy expecting something that was entirely different from what I got. What I wanted was a cool swashbuckling pirate adventure story where a female pirate captain and her dragon friend wreaks havoc in search for treasure with their found family crew and a ship with enough personality that it could have been its own character. I still really want a story like that. Unfortunately, this was not that story. No, what I got in this trilogy was a lot of political nonsense, with the pirating kept to a disappointing minimum and present only in the first book. For one, the story involving the politics, and this was the main story, was not interesting at all. Everything was incredibly predictable, and there was such a lack of stakes that I didn't even care about any political conflict at all. Zilch, nothing. I hated it. There was little to no conflict between the characters, and the characters themselves were bland, but most of all, the romance killed it for me, because there was literally no development, and the supposed couple barely spent any time together, so it was very insta-lovey, and yuck, I didn't like it at all. So overall, it was not fun, and this trilogy sent me into a massive reading slump that I'm still barely getting over. I will say, though, if you're looking for a very Victorian era-esque steampunk setting with a lot of politics, I guess you could give the series a shot because that's what the main conflict is. So the next book is Dark Lover by J.R. Ward. I've also made a review video for this book, and while I didn't quite like it per se, I did enjoy it a lot more than I thought I would. Of course, the romance was the worst part of it, but I was pleasantly surprised by the depth of the world building and the relationships between all the characters. I also read it pretty quickly, so props to it for being easy to read. That being said, again, the romance really killed it for me. Like Corsairs, I really don't think there was any development for the romance, and in this particular case, the romance was all about sex. These characters literally have sex the first time they meet, and from then on I had zero interest in the romance. The worst part for me was that the main character Beth was introduced by being sexually assaulted before proceeding to want to fuck an intruder in her home with no trauma left on her whatsoever. I thought it was distasteful, and the age gap really didn't do it for me, since the love interest the vampire obviously was hundreds of years older than her. Like, ugh, no. Yeah, not for me. I only read this book because my friend wanted to know what I thought about it, but otherwise I would not have picked it up. Now, the next book I have on my list, The Sorcerer's Lady by Paula Volsky, wasn't a book I really hated per se. It was just one of those books you pick up because it's there and there's nothing else to read or do. So I actually picked this up on one of my field trips because it was in the mini library they had available to students. It was an okay book, I guess. It's an old fantasy book, and, well, I don't really have much to say about it. It was okay if it was kind of generic. The main character wasn't too annoying, at least, and her husband, who's the sorcerer, was... At least he wasn't an asshole. Um, yeah, I yeah, I don't really have much else to say. I liked the servant creatures the sorcerer had, and they actually kind of carried the book for me, to be honest. The fourth on this list is A Throne for Sisters by Morgan Rice. I said back, because this was in one of my wrap-up videos, I believe. Back then, I said I would make a review for this, but I never did because whenever I tried, I went on a rant and the video ended up being too long, no matter how much I tried to cut it down, so I just gave up. It had several issues that really dampened the book for me, and I only read it because it was a free audiobook in the Google Play Store and it was really short. I wanted the sisters' relationship to be explored a little bit more, maybe have a little bit more conflict due to their juxtaposing interests. I did like that they respected each other's decisions, but something about their interactions were just so shallow to me. At one point, the younger sister mentions that she has no idea what happened to their parents because they're orphans. And the older sister, who knows, refuses to tell her what happened. And I feel like this should have been a point of contention in their relationship. It would have been really interesting to read. But no, they separate in less than 5 chapters and meet once in a while until the end of the book. The book was okay, I guess, but it might just be because I was listening to it rather than reading it. There were interesting tidbits, I will say, but they never got explored, like the religion, which I found was really interesting, and I feel like the religion should have been explored a bit more, because the entire conflict the sisters go through is because of the religion. But yeah, I wouldn't be continuing on with the series, it just wasn't that great. And next, I have a novella, Transformation by Sarah Elizabeth. I believe I've talked about this book before as well. It's really short, and the story of an arrogant noble learning his lesson by experiencing life as the lowest rank of society was predictable and a little bit cliched. Still, it was a quick read, and the ocean setting really saved this book for me. Don't really have much else to say about it. Oh, I don't know why this book isn't higher on this list. It's it's Smoke Jensen, The Beginning by William W. Johnston or Johnstone. I was into the Wild West at the time I picked this up, watching documentaries and all that, and I was really wanting to read a cool cowboy gunslinging story. I didn't mind this book, even though I feel like I should have hated it given the Gary Souness of the main character and the meandering plot. But nah, I actually quite like this book. And I found the main character's prodigious skill in gunslinging not that annoying, most probably because that's what I wanted in the first place. He could have struggled a little bit more in being the best gunslinger in the West, but yeah, it was whatever. I didn't love it or hate it, and when was reading it, I enjoyed it. So it's fine for what it is. And that is all for this section. I will now go to the books that I enjoyed a whole lot more. This section is going to be a lot harder to rank. The order is subject to change, so this isn't set in stone. So going by my current thoughts, this is the ranking that it's going to be for now. So yeah, let's just get started. Starting with the book that I loved least. even though I did enjoy it. We have Killing Floor by Leigh. I've talked about this book before, so I won't go into much detail. I will say, I liked the introduction to the iconic Jack Reacher, and the thriller part of the book was really well done. However, I felt like the writing lacked some depth. I guess it's okay since it's supposed to be a fast-paced plot, and maybe I just wasn't in the mood for a plot-driven story when I was reading this, but I was left vaguely disappointed upon finishing it. I still do like it quite a bit and plan on continuing on with the series. I just don't think it was very strong, especially in terms of the side characters. Other than the police chief, he was my favorite, and I kind of wish he was a recurring character, but I don't think he is, unfortunately. Next, I have The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Now, I'm not even sure if this should be on this list because it's technically a short story, but it's whatever. I read it as an audiobook, so it's gonna be in this list. I'm not sure how I feel about this actually. It might be because I was cooking when I was listening to this, which might have resulted in me not paying attention. But it was a little disappointing, I guess. I might give it another read as a visual copy and maybe I'll understand it better, but for now I'm gonna just rank it here. I was into it and then the ending lost me, even when I listened to it several times after. So, yeah, that's why it's not any higher. Breach of Peace by Daniel Green comes in next on this list. So I was hyped about his novella whenever I watched his videos. So I had really high hopes for it. It was a little bit like less than what I was hoping for, but I overall enjoyed it. And I was a little bit more lenient just because it was his debut and I do love his videos. So I I guess it also kind of helps that he does explain some things about the world in some of his videos, which might have helped me understand the world building elements a little bit better compared to someone who doesn't follow him. Still, it was a little bit confusing near the climax, and the ending was a bit abrupt. I'm actually waiting for his next book to be delivered, so hopefully any confusions about Breach of Peace will get cleared up in it. Next up is A Dog's Purpose by W. Bruce Cameron. This is a cute little read about a dog who reincarnates for his human. It's very simple, as a dog's perspective should be, but it still manages to explore a lot of complex themes, I'd say, such as death, loneliness, and, as the title suggests, purpose. I adored this book, and the scenes with tension had a lot of tension. I loved it, and it's only this low on the list because I just love the other books a little bit more. Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson beats A Dog's Purpose by a smidge. I love the concept of magic libraries and books with personalities, and the cautious steps that you had to go through maintaining them was really fun. I also really liked the idea of demons being passed down the family. There's something very captivating about it, actually. It's like passing on literal demons also passes down metaphorical ones through generations. Sins of the father type of themes. I kind of wish that was a focus now, but yeah, I liked it well enough the way it is. So the ending was probably the worst part about it. It got a little bit too convenient, but I did like the bittersweet final theme. I liked this book well enough, but I feel like it could have gone a lot deeper with the character relationships. But the setting and cool concept kind of made up for it, so it's whatever, it's fine. Next we have Shadow's Edge by Brent Weeks. So this is the sequel to A Way of Shadows, and it was okay. I thought the main female love interest was a little bit annoying, and I kind of wish there wasn't a love triangle thrown in there, but yeah, it was fine. I I don't know. I feel like this book should be a little bit lower on this list, but I like the characters enough that I'm just gonna put it here. Next on this list is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. This book, Honestly, it was amazingly executed. The scientific approach to vampires, the last survivor trope, the twist ending, it was all brilliant. It's short, it's sweet, and it leaves a lasting impact. Really well done. Highly recommend. On the theme of vampires, the next book I'm going to talk about is Dracula by Bram Stoker. This book is a classic in every sense of the word. Dracula's vampires are what I love, not the romancy ones. I loved the clash of Dracula's supernatural powers with Van Helsing's science and the horror of turning into vampires. Like, this book really cranks it up. Becoming a vampire is like the worst thing that can happen to you. Really great read, and I definitely want to reread it someday. The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman comes up next. It's whimsical, it's nostalgic, and has a very bittersweet ending. I loved every moment of this book. Well, almost every moment, but what I didn't like in the book was intentionally written so that you wouldn't want to like it. Honestly, some of these scenes were really unnerving to read through because the main character was a kid. And so we're looking through a childlike, innocent kind of lens of the main character. And yeah, it gets really unnerving in some scenes. But yeah, really great read. The next one is a recent read. It is Legend by David Gemmell. So, like The Sorcerer's Lady, I picked this book up on a field trip. Unlike The Sorcerer's Lady, I was invested in the plot. This book, uh, I don't know how to explain it. So, it has these tropes I hate. It has insta-love. It has, and this is a little bit spoilery, the resurrection trope. It has a chosen one element thrown in randomly. And yet, it still managed to keep me engaged. I loved this book, despite the tropes that I didn't like. I think part of the reason for this is because these characters were fighting a losing battle. The entire premise of this book is that these characters are fighting a battle that they know they will lose, for sure, and will most likely die in the end. We also kind of get the antagonist's point of view, and it introduces this really complex morality because the antagonist is not a villain at all. The reason he's attacking them is it makes sense why. And he gives the heroes several chances for them to live by surrendering, but they don't. So he's basically, oh, I have no choice but to kill you type of situation. And in fact, he respected the heroes so much that he was willing to give them honorable rituals for their passing. And this isn't spoilers, by the way, because he says this to the characters as he advances the battle. Every time he tries to negotiate and they say no, he's like, okay, then you're gonna die, but this is what I'll do after you die. So yeah. And add to that the battle strategies and the slow progression of the enemy taking over the fort. And this was excruciating to read in the best way possible. This book was fresh and brilliant. The ending was unfortunately not the best, which the resurrection trope kind of has a little to do with it. But, it didn't ruin the book for me, so it's fine. So, Sisters of Sword and Song by Rebecca Ross, which is next on this list. It was well written, and the relationship between the sisters was one of my favorite parts about it. So, now, I don't want to be mean here, but I feel like Sisters of Sword and Song is what A Throne for Sisters was trying to be. Because they both, okay, Sisters of Sword and Song, it has meaningful sister dynamics, a situation that the sisters find themselves in due to the world's religion, a forceful separation where both sisters are in danger. Yeah, definitely some similarities there. But this was done so much better. I loved the world building, and the characters were what drove the story for me. Definitely recommend this. It's really fun, very meaningful characters. Loved it. Up next is the Broken Empire trilogy by Mark Lawrence. Well, I actually read Prince of Thorns last year, and then I finished the trilogy this year. But yeah, it was an interesting series to say the least. Jorg, the main character, is a really horrible person, and yet somehow I was rooting for him the entire time. I loved his growth and maturity, and even though he was a terrible person till the end, I could see him struggling with how little he valued human life when he was younger, and he did become a better person, even if it was by a small margin. His character development was really fascinating to read about, and his relationships with his, I guess it's found family, was even more interesting simply because of how much of a villain he could be. There was also one of my favorite tropes in these books, which is the gentle monster bonding with a small child, and that made me melt. So, yeah. The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang is next. So, this book, okay, firstly, I loved the Chinese inspired setting. I'm currently trying to find fantasy that's actually inspired by different cultures, so reading this from a Chinese perspective was really new and refreshing. I knew this was inspired by true events of the Sino, I believe that's how you say it, Sino-Japanese War, and it was bleak and horrible, and I loved every moment of it because of the way it explores the themes of war. But I've also heard people say that the horrors inflicted on the people in this book were distastefully done. But I honestly kind of disagree. The thing is, these are some of the thoughts that I did have back when I was reading this. I thought the things the enemy soldiers did to the people were cranked up to the extreme. But now I think it was a necessary thing. So, not long after reading The Poppy War, there was a video about the crimes against humanity committed by Japanese soldiers in China that popped up in my YouTube recommended. And when I watched it, my perspective in this book completely changed. I can 100% believe that the violent depictions in this book are accurate. And in fact, it's actually tamed down from what happened in real life. So, that's pretty scary. Um, so yeah, I have a lot of respect for the author for writing about it, and it's one of the reasons why it's higher on this list. I'm going to try to leave a link of the video I watched in the description if I can find it. I'm gonna try to find it, but yeah, hopefully I'll be able to. Okay, moving away from the topic of war, the next book is The Troop by Nick Cutter. And don't let the title deceive you because this is not at all about the military. The Troop is about a bunch of Boy Scouts trapped on an island with a disturbing, let's say, infestation that tends to end up with blown up body parts. So this book is grotesque and nasty and yuck. I'm glad I didn't have a squeamish stomach when I was reading this. Um, but other than the horror aspect, which I really loved, what I loved in this book are the characters. The boys' dynamics completely change once they're put in a situation they have to survive in, which this is another trope that I really love. And it's that trope where the supposed weak ones are the ones that rise to the top because they're used to handling pressure, and they're the key to survival. I'm such a sucker for it. Really love it. And of course, my top three books of the year are all fantasy. So, The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb comes in third. I believe this was actually the first book I read this year, and it still stuck with me. It has a lot of tropes I love: the master apprentice trope, the father figure trope, bonding with animals, whatnot. And the story is really captivating, the magic system is intriguing, characters are the strongest in this book, I think. I really loved Fitz, the main character, and I loved his relationships with all the other characters, including the dogs. And honestly, I should have read the next two books, but I guess that's for next year. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so these next two are really tough to rank. Honestly, I'd rather say that they're tied at first place because they can easily be switched around at any given day. I guess I'll just start with the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. this trilogy, oh, it was wild. The story was told so masterfully, and it just got better and better with each book. The ending made me cry, not ashamed to admit it, and I still find myself thinking about it today. The writing was beautiful and immersive, and I really don't think anyone else can do a second person perspective better. Loved it, it was great, and I'm definitely planning on rereading it one day. And now, for the obvious, the one tied with Broken Earth is the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. Well, technically, it's the next two books because, like Prince of Thorns, I read The Final Empire in 2020. So, this trilogy, it did not disappoint. The way the plot points all threaded together to make a cohesive, mystery filled story was just wow. I have no idea how Sanderson manages to tell such an intricate and complex story with such a simplistic writing style. The world building is brilliant, of course, and the magic system is probably the best that I've ever seen. I love the characters, I love the story, I love the world, and I honestly I wish I read this book a lot sooner than I did. And that's pretty much it. It's been a fairly fruitful reading year for me, ignoring the massive reading slump, and I'm pretty happy with my results. I didn't end up reading the number of books that I was shooting for in 2021, which was 50 books. I read 29, but that's okay. I still had a lot of fun. I still grew as a reader, and I think that's all that really matters. So, with that all being said and done, I'm gonna go head off now. Thanks for watching. Bye.